Okay, so this is a short video on the uses of if clauses. There are three ways in which we use these. I do go into more detail with other videos on my channel, but this one is particularly to do with weather. So let's have a look at the first way where we might use the if clauses. In a minute, there we go. So if plus the present tense. Okay, so these would be when you have general statements or things that you do regularly. So for example, if it rains, every time it rains, I go to the beach. Si llueve, voy a la playa. If it's foggy, I stay at home. So every time it's foggy, that's what I do. Si hay niebla, me quedo en casa. If it's hot, I wear shorts. Si hace calor, llevo los pantalones cortos. And if it's sunny, I sunbathe. Okay. Now I don't have time in this video to go through how you do the present tense, but if you're not sure, perhaps pause this or come out of this and go through the present tense first, and then come back to this. Okay, so some practice. I've put the infinitive for each of the verbs in the second part after each of the sentences here. There's a few that are radical changing, the first and the last. Again, if you don't know how radical changing works, it might be worth having a look at that first before coming on to this. And then if you pause it now, have a go, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so the first one. Si hace frío, enciendo un fuego. Si hace viento, damos un paseo. Si hace sol, monto en bici para ir a la escuela. You could have put al colegio or al instituto there as well. Cuatro, si hace mucho calor, notice we put mucho for very when we're using this part of weather. So literally we're saying there's lots of heat rather than it's very hot. Mi jefe compra bebidas frías. Si está nublado, a mi hermano le gusta estar en el jardín. So this is in personal verbs. Remember, put that le before Gustave, he, she, and it. Mi hermano, when we mention the name of somebody, we put this little a before it. And then afterwards, when we've got a verb that is still related to the person who's doing the first verb, so my brother's doing the liking and he's being in the garden as well, we just put the infinitive, okay? Estar we also use for position, so there's a lot there. If you're not sure about those, there's a video on the use of personal a, there's a video on impersonal verbs, and there's a video on the verb ser and estar. Okay, so next one. Si hay tormenta, miramos los relámpagos. Si hace frío, pero hace sol, nado en el mar. You could have put me baño en el mar as well. And si hace mal tiempo, el alcalde cierra la playa. Okay, so the first one, the last one, are radical changing. There is a video on those if you're not sure how those work. Okay, so that's just using the present tense. Okay, so next one. This one is where we use the present tense, then we follow it by a future tense. So things that will happen, so with a definite perhaps future reference. So if I go to the beach, I will play volleyball. So tomorrow, if I go to the beach, that's what I'll do. Si voy a la playa, jugaré al voleibol. So in English, we use present tense in the first part, and then we follow it by the simple future in the second part, and the same thing happens in Spanish. So we use present tense in the first part and the simple future in the second part. If we travel to Spain, we will visit Madrid. Si viajamos a España, visitaremos Madrid. If it's sunny, I will wear sunglasses. Si hace sol, llevaré gafas de sol. If it's very cold, the water will freeze. Si hace mucho frío, el agua se congelará. Congelará, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so this one, just note here that when we're saying very cold, and literally we're saying there's lots of cold as a noun in Spanish, rather than using the word very. So be careful with that when you're doing your weather. Just a quick recap on the simple future. Now, we haven't got time to go through all the irregulars, etc., but this is basically how it works. So we take any infinitive ending in AR, ER, and IR, and then we add these endings. As, a, hemos, es, an, and these are in the order I, you, he, she, it, we, you plural, and they. Okay, so then here we've got our verb, infinitive, comer. Then we want to say I will eat, so we add e on the end, it becomes comeré. Now the main problem people have here is that because other verbs, or other tenses rather, you take off that infinitive ending, quite often people take that off and then add the ending that's up here. So just be careful you don't do that. There are some irregulars. Again, we don't have time to go through that in this video, but there is a video on my channel on the simple future and the near future. Okay, a bit of practice. There's 4 there to do, 5 there to do, sorry, can't count. So pause it now, have a go, and then I'll go over the answers with you. Okay, so the first one. Si hace sol, tomaré el sol. Si llueve, iremos a un museo. Note here the ir, which is generally irregular in most tenses. This one is actually regular. Si nieva, esquiarán en las montañas. 4. Si está nublado, correré alrededor del lago. 5. Si hay niebla, no conduciremos a la ciudad. Okay, right. And then the last one, now this one's slightly more tricky. And I do have a whole video on this, so I'm not going to go through lots of it in full detail, but just so we've got some examples when we're using it with the weather. So this is when we have things that might be possible. The subjunctive in English is not really a tense that's used very much. It's maybe when we use the word were, if I were to do something, or if it were to do something, that's basically the only place where we use it. But in Spanish, subjunctive is used quite a lot. And there are lots of things that are called triggers that after that we need to use the subjunctive. But particularly for this one, we're using if clauses and then we're following it with conditional tense. So if it were to rain, or if it was raining, I would go by car. So in English, we're putting this subjunctive. We could put it was raining, and then we're following it by the conditional tense. Okay, so si lloviera, iría en coche. Next one, if it were or was sunny, we would swim in the pool. So si hiciera sol, nadaríamos en la piscina. And the last one, if it were windy, he would go sailing. Si hiciera viento, él haría la vela. I put the L in brackets there because in Spanish we don't normally use the pronouns unless it's an ambiguous statement or we want to put some emphasis there. Now, as I said before, I'm not going to go into big details about how the imperfect subjunctive works because there is another video on that, and maybe you need to pause this and do that video first before finishing this one. But just as a general summary of how it works, what we first do is we take the they form in the preterite tense, which ends in aron or ieron, and the reason we do that is that gives us most of our regulars. So a traditional one that teachers will tell their students is the verb tener, for example, and then tener goes to tuvieron in the preterite. We take the ieron off, and then we're left with tuv, T-U-V, and that's how we get tuviera or tuvieran, etc. And quite often we say, oh, if I had the money, I would. Si tuviera el dinero. So that's how that one works, okay? So these are the endings, ara, aras, ara, aramos, arais, aran, iera, ieras, iera, ieramos, ierais, ieran. Now there is another set of endings for the subjunctive, but what I've tried to do is consolidate just these ones here. If you want to know more about the imperfect subjunctive, then have a look at my video. Okay, so here we've got the conditional tense, just a bit of a summary of that as well. So we use the infinitive again, like we did in the simple future, and then we add on the end of that. So ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ean. In the normal order, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, and they. Again, as in the simple future, the mistake people make is that they take the EA, ER, AR, and IR off and then add the endings. But for this one, you need to make sure you leave it on. If you take it off, it then becomes imperfect tense for ER and IR verbs. So you need to be careful with that one. So for example, comer is our infinitive, and then we'd add ER on the end, become I would eat. All right, there is a video on the conditional as well with the irregular ones, but you'll probably need to have a look at that if you want to go through that in any more detail. Okay, so let's just have a practice with these particular ones. Okay, so here are some ideas for practicing this one. So in each sentence, the first part, the weather part, is in the imperfect subjunctive. So you need to make sure that the main verb in most of these cases is imperfect subjunctive, and then the second part of the sentence, or second part of second clause rather, this is where you'd use the conditional, so where you've got the word would. All right. Okay, so pause it now, go back through the video if you're not sure how that works, have a look at my other videos if you're not sure that works, and then come back to this and then have a go. Okay, we'll go through the answers in a minute. Okay, so the first one, si hiciera sol, irías a Francia. Si hiciera calor, llevaríamos sandalias. Si hiciera frío, ella no visitaría a sus abuelos. Again, I put ella in here just to show you that you could put it there if the sentence was ambiguous, but otherwise we don't need it. And then we've got this personal a before the people here, so verb plus people needs to have that a in between. There's a video on that if you're not sure how that works. Number 4, si hiciera viento, no jugaría al tenis. Little key thing here, whenever we use the verb jugar, we always follow it by al and then the sport. Si hubiera tormenta, nos esconderíamos en casa. This one's a reflexive verb, so if you're not sure how reflexive verbs work, that's fine. I guess if you've got the conditional ending, then at least you're almost there. Number 6, si estuviera nublado, no necesitaría gafas de sol. 7, si hiciera mal tiempo, leería un libro. And the last one, si hiciera buen tiempo, saldría al jardín. Salir is an irregular conditional, and it goes to saldr, but again, if you look at my video on the conditional, you should be able to work that one out. Okay, I think that's been helpful. Rewind it back, have another go, look through the notes, and then talk to your teacher if there's anything that you're not sure about.